What is yoga to me? How have I come to understand it? To me, yoga is a physical discipline. It's a physical form of exercise where the practitioner moves, they bend, they stretch, and as a result of that, it improves the quality of their life. And it begins physically, but we know that there's more to it than that. So that's why I say it just improves quality of life. I mean physiological and psychological. So that's what it means. That's how I've come to understand it. Do you know what? Just get it out of the way. Just open it.
Thanks. Right.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my understanding of it, okay? So I kind of explain it to 3 different types of people. The first person I explain it to, Carly comes to me for the first time to beginner's course and she says, "Here, what is yoga?" Okay, so I'm thinking about the person, where they are, to help me kind of articulate an explanation. Okay, so I say to them, yoga is a physical discipline. It's a form of exercise. It's unlike any other really, but you will move, you will bend and you stretch and you'll feel great. Should be like sold. Okay? Then you get Richard, who's been doing yoga for a couple of years and is a little more intrigued now and is looking for a different answer. So I will say to Richard that yoga now is purely psychological. You've got past the physiological side, and now you're going to find that most of the obstacles are in your head. Headstand, handstand, all these poses that you now know you are very, very physically capable. The restriction is just psychological. Okay, so for the beginner, I say it's a physiological practice. It's physical. Just move and you will feel better. I say to Richard, it's still physiological, but now yoga for you is a psychological practice. I don't want to give the answer I would give to Richard to Carly because she's not going to know what I'm talking about. I feel like you need to be doing some yoga for you to think, oh, I know what Zahir's talking about.
Yeah.
Agreed? The third type of person is you guys, where you know it's physical, you know it's poses, you know there's a psychological element, but now you want to know, what is yoga culturally speaking? Because you've got an idea now that the yoga we do, this physical discipline, is really just a Western form of yoga. But you know there's a bigger picture. What is yoga culturally speaking? Yeah, and that's what we'll get to. What is yoga? Yoga, culturally speaking, is the science or the process of self-realization. We know this, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's the science or the process of self-realization.
We know that, but that was nicely summarised.
Okay, is it a science? Some people say no, some people say yes, but it's not many people disagree that it's the process of self-realization. Yeah? So what is yoga? Yoga is an umbrella term. It is a culture which has lots of subcultures. We know that, right? Mm-hmm. These subcultures, these different types of yoga within the overall umbrella term of yoga they're all different, they're all contrasting, contradictory at times, but at the same time they kind of interlink and intertwine. They all seem to have, though, one consistent theme, and that is that the practitioner doing this type of yoga is looking to return back to the source of which they are from. That's the consistent thing. Yeah, they all want this great homecoming. Patanjali says that yoga is the stillness of mind. What is the difference between stillness of mind and the science of self-realization? Patanjali is just saying to us that stillness of mind is the gateway to this self-realization. It's not It's not opening a window and looking out into the infinite. It is actually, it opens the gates to the universe. Patanjali is making our life easier. The same way, if you say to me, Zahir, how can I do handstand? I've been trying and I keep falling. And I would say to you, you're doing too much too soon. There is something we can do today that is going to build your core strength, build your kind of neural pathways from your brain to your hips, help you lift your center of mass. So let's not talk about handstand, let's focus on this one pose. When you master that, everything opens up to you, even more than handstand. And that's kind of what Patanjali is doing for us. He's saying, forget about what this realization is. Let's just focus on the gateway, which is stillness of mind. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so we know what yoga is. Kind of when did this come about? We haven't discussed this, so I'm going to be very, very brief with it. But it is said that yoga began even before the dawn of time. Because culturally speaking, there's one of the primary gods called Vishnu or Narayan. And as far as we understand anything about the universe or the cosmos, it's based on this one day, billions of years ago, where this individual, Narayan, opens his eyes and finds himself lying on a serpent. This is all mythological and I don't quite understand what it means, but not being disrespectful, there are some people not in here, but some people I've spoken to over the years who believe this to be actual events. So it's disrespectful for me to say mythological. I understand it as a mythology and I'm not quite sure I understand the meaning. Yeah? So he's lying on this serpent and Narayan looks around and he sees a kind of never-ending galaxy universe around him. Okay, this is an empty void which pulsates with life and Narayan feels it in himself. So he is not in space, he feels like he is part of this universe. And he doesn't articulate, he doesn't speak, but in his head he's thinking, what is this reality? So before the Big Bang, before the dawn of time, yoga existed because that inquiry, what is this reality, has always been around. And that essentially is yoga.
The question has been out there, what is this reality? Yoga has existed.
Yeah, because that essentially is it.
Okay.
Because what's the first step to this self-realization? It's the inquiry, the initial inquiry, exactly. Okay, so yoga has existed since the dawn of time. Our understanding of it as well, what is your reality, that starts from Shiva's conversation with Parvati in the Vijnan Bhairav Tantra, where Parvati asks, remember it's a very loving question. As we said last time, it's not standoff, it's not a distant question, it's not even a curious question. It is a very loving, loving question. You know, what is your reality? Okay, Shiva of course gives her 112 techniques that if she applies herself to at least one of them, she can recognize her own reality, because it's the science of self-realization. Because if Shiva explains to her, he's only telling her about his own reality, about his experience in this reality. And we know this on a smaller scale, because if I ask you what is yoga, each one of us is going to find it increasingly difficult and frustrating to explain to everyone in the room what it really means to us. And we know that, don't we? Because we're just trying to articulate our own experience. So Shiva just says the easiest thing is, here are 112 techniques, and through one of these you will experience this reality for yourself. It's already there within you, and that's the really important thing, self-realization. Why do yoga? Why explore this science of self-realization? As we said last time round, there's another consistent theme in yoga, and that is that the yogi believes that life is suffering and that we are all doomed to live in this cycle of rebirths. Yeah, so the physical body that you have will perish and your soul will be reborn in another body at a later date to be determined by your karma. Based on my experience of speaking to people, holy men, sadhus in India and Nepal, most people do yoga now not to free themselves from this cycle. They feel like we're too late for that. All they are doing is trying to return back in the next life with karmic credit rather than karmic debt. They believe we're way beyond that now. We've been on this earth for too long. If you look around, if you look at the suffering in humanity, all we can do and the best we can ask for is to come back with a slightly better chance of realizing this realization. Yeah, so it's like the goal has been almost made more accessible now. And that's why very few people that I've ever heard of have found this reality. And when they do, they're elevated to like the status of a god, because it seems like an impossible task. Which if you said, Zahir, it seems very impossible, doesn't it? I would agree with you. So what is yoga? Science of self-realization. When did it begin? Since the dawn of time. And our understanding today is from the Vigyan Bhairava Tantra and then Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Because Patanjali makes it easier and accessible to us, or a little more so, by saying that yoga is the stillness of mind. Why do yoga? We do yoga, well, we don't, but the yogis who do yoga, culturally speaking, do yoga to free themselves from this cycle of suffering, which we are all trapped in. Yeah? Another reason why to do yoga, right? So, I'm not going to dwell on this. I could do for hours, but I'm not going to, right? So, if you think of Parvati's inquiry to Shiva, very, very loving, so intrigued. Parvati is aching because she feels like there is something inside herself that needs awakening. She's in a desperate situation, like spiritually speaking. She feels so close yet so far away. A deep frustration exists in Parvati. Okay? That's why she is ready, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah? And if we break that down to the modern day practitioner, like, you can't really understand yoga until you are in some form of deep frustration with your life, the direction of your life. It could be the breakup of a partner, which is really common because we're slightly lost and we feel we need this kind of anyone want to help me out here with some words?
Direction.
Yeah, perhaps belonging. We feel we need community. And yoga does fill more voids than we realise. It fills voids that we didn't know we had, which is the strange thing. But we have to be almost at our lowest point, and some of us don't even know we are. Mm-hmm. And how does Patanjali start the Yoga Sutras? Very interestingly. He says, now the discipline of yoga. It's a very odd way to start a book. It's like, hang on, do we read something before?
No, you have to be broken.
Exactly. Exactly.
Sick of your own shit. Yeah.
Whether that's physically or spiritually, you have to be like almost broken to really understand the magic. So whether that's something inside you feels like you're being drawn to it and you're really frustrated and you can't understand it. It's like some people are on the verge of schizophrenia. It can be that bad, or you can be broken physically if we're talking about modern day physical yoga, but something is drawing you to yoga, and that's why Patanjali says, now the discipline of yoga. Now you're ready, now you're here. And that's when you're in a better place to understand it. And if none of you feel broken in any way, and that's not to say you are at all, or you may think you're broken, but you're probably not. You might find later down the line, you might get to a stage in your life, whatever that is, because we all suffer in some respect. You might pick up the Yoga Sutras and it makes that much more sense, because you are more broken at that time than you are now. And you understand, this is what Patanjali means. This is why we do yoga. Now the discipline of yoga. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah? How do we do yoga? Oh, sorry, not how do we do yoga. How do we experience this self-realization? Well, we know yoga is this umbrella term and it has many subcultures, right? The most obvious one is Patanjali's scientific system of Ashtanga yoga. Ash meaning 8, Dang meaning legs. Dang, limb, legs, isn't it? It is, yeah? Yeah. So it means 8 limbs, the kind of stages of yoga. And it's a very scientific process, whereas in the first thing we do is we look at our morals. Hopefully, if you haven't been raised by wolves, your parents would have instilled that in you. So what's the first thing we do? We do asanas. And we may spend the rest of our life mastering asanas, not even mastering them, before we get to the next point. And we may never. There are so many people who say, oh, I'm on Patanjali's 4th or 5th limb. I think, I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are here, but you're not. You have to really, really embrace it and understand it. And Patanjali is saying that one limb leads to the next. It's like climbing a ladder. So this is why, according to Patanjali's system of yoga, which is the one most of the Western world follow, you and I cannot do meditation. You and I can sit there with our eyes closed and act like we're meditating, or we can do something that brings us value, but it's not yogic meditation. That is a destination, because the first step leads to that step and the next step leads to the other. So this is why when someone says, I meditate all the time, I'm like, I'm sure you do, but if we're going by Patanjali's system, it is not yogic meditation. It is sitting there with your eyes closed, trying your absolute best to not think about what you're going to have for dinner, think about work. And actual fact, evidence has shown that you get even more frustrated because you're expecting it to work. Yeah. And most of the time, we are simply not ready to bear the burden of meditation, physically speaking. This is why asanas work so well. But a lot of people don't place enough value because they want to be more yogic and they want to do meditation. When if you go by Patanjali's system, which is so brilliant, we're just not ready for it. It's not that it doesn't work, we're not ready for Patanjali's system.
Part of the self-realisation though, because it might not be peaceful, but you're still sitting with yourself.
That's why I say it has value. Don't get me wrong, it can have value. Probably not for the time that you spend in a yoga class, because this is why 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes might work. But an hour or a weekend meditations are very frustrating.
Yeah.
They just don't work. Is there value in you sitting by yourself for 5 minutes and breathing? Absolutely. It does work, but it appears, based on the evidence, that little and often is better than a weekend meditation or an hour class. It just doesn't work. How else can we find this realization? Tantra. Tantra is very direct, isn't it? So or the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra. Shiva gives 112 techniques. Most of them we'll read and we'll feel a little bit lost, but some of the basic breathing exercises, concentration exercises at the start are very accessible. I'm not saying we're going to master them, but they're accessible to understand. If we follow one of those and give our life up to this technique, you can theoretically experience the realization the way Parvati did. Parvati felt it. She experienced it in an instant because she was so close. She didn't force it. It wasn't, I want to do what my husband does. It just felt so natural for her. She was drawn to it. How else can you do it? There's other types of yoga, isn't there? Remember these branches. There is bhakti yoga, devotional yoga, love. Now this is the most intriguing one. You know, Jem asked a really interesting question. If Shiva is so enlightened, how did he fall in love? It's a great question. Another way to look at that is, was it love that got him enlightened? I mean, I don't know the answer. It's just, you know, well, because this is all philosophy, and philosophy is ignorance. We just have questions, right? We're just trying to understand it by looking at it from different perspectives. So, was it love for Parvati that helped him find his enlightenment? I don't know. You know, I spoke about my love for Zaki, and I would say that for me is the purest love I've experienced. And you weren't offending me at all, Hala, but it's a very, very good point. Is it just my imagination? A yogi who thinks the only real love is the love you experience for your deity, for God, would say, I'm completely deluded. I would say he is, because we all have our own definitions of what love is. Does that make sense? The other thing about why do yoga is you're trying to avoid this cycle of rebirth. There's this argument to be had that you would ideally be reborn in the next life as a woman. And if you are closer to experiencing love because of the unconditional love, in theory, you would have for your child, which is the closest thing to God. Because God is love. Does that make sense? That's just a theory. I'm not saying that any of this is right, yeah? So, love can bring you closer to this realization. If not, help you realize God or the universe, etc. But bhakti devotion is a very, very complicated subject. You know, I would speak at length about what it means to love and what love is. And very, very easily, a sadhu, a holy man, could be sat next to me and saying, you've got it completely wrong. And I'd be like, no, mate, you have. Because it's very subjective, right? You know, it's really important for us to understand, this is my take on it, to understand the nature of someone who leaves their family in pursuit of love, in pursuit of God. Okay, and there's a lot of psychology behind this. What kind of a person leaves his children and leaves his wife in the pursuit of God? Okay, it's the kind of person who perhaps married through an obligation. He never fell in love. He didn't really want children because he never fell in love. And so for the rest of his life, psychologically, he's always trying to get back at them for some reason. Doesn't realize he's doing this subconsciously. In the same way that if you don't discipline your kids, you'll end up getting back at them somehow later on in life.